What happens when Barack Obama, a figure admired by millions for his poise and wisdom, faces public insults over something as simple as giving college advice? What unfolds next will leave you speechless. It all began on a quiet, sunny afternoon when Obama, known for his candid conversations, decided to share a piece of advice with a group of college students during a community event in Chicago. Standing in front of a diverse crowd, he spoke about the importance of resilience, the value of hard work, and how success often lies in embracing failures along the way. His words, as always, were inspiring, until one young man decided to challenge him in a way no one expected. The young man, seated in the middle of the audience, stood up abruptly. Dressed in a hoodie and jeans, his voice cut through the calm atmosphere like a knife. "Easy for you to say," he scoffed. "You're a former president. What do you know about struggling in the real world?" The crowd fell silent, every eye darting between the young man and Obama. You could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. For a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. Even the cameraman froze, unsure whether to pan to the speaker or keep the lens fixed on Obama. Obama, however, didn't flinch. His warm, steady gaze remained fixed on the young man, and after a pause that felt like an eternity, he responded with a calm smile. "You know," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I wasn't always a former president. Once upon a time, I was a young man trying to figure things out, just like you." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that resonated deeply with many in the audience. But the young man wasn't convinced. He crossed his arms defiantly, muttering under his breath, "Yeah, right. Like you ever had to work 2 jobs just to pay rent." And that's when Obama did something unexpected. He stepped down from the stage and walked straight into the crowd. The audience parted like the Red Sea as he approached the young man. Standing face to face, he looked him in the eye and said, "Let me tell you a story." The crowd leaned in, hanging on to every word, their anticipation almost tangible. Obama began to recount a time in his life when things weren't so glamorous, a time when he was a struggling student in college, balancing multiple jobs, and wondering if all his efforts would ever pay off. His words painted a vivid picture of late nights spent poring over textbooks, early mornings working at the cafeteria, and the relentless cycle of hope and doubt that many young people knew all too well. The young man's defiance started to waver, his posture softening as he listened. But then someone in the crowd shouted, "Why should we believe you? You've had it easy ever since." Laughter rippled through the audience, and for a moment it seemed like the tide was turning against Obama. But then he said something that silenced the crowd entirely. "I may have had success later in life," he admitted, "but the struggles I faced never left me. They shaped me into the person I am today. And if you think that success erases struggle, then you're missing the point." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "The point is not where you end up. It's the journey, the lessons, and the people who help you along the way." The crowd erupted into applause, but Obama wasn't finished. He turned back to the young man and said, "And let me tell you something else. Your struggles are valid. Your doubts are valid. But don't let them define you. Let them push you to become better." The young man looked down, his earlier bravado replaced by a thoughtful silence. It was clear that something had shifted, not just in him, but in everyone who was listening. What happened next was something no one expected. Obama invited the young man onto the stage, offering him a chance to share his story. Hesitant at first, the young man eventually opened up about the challenges he was facing, juggling school, work, and family responsibilities, all while feeling like he was falling behind in life. His honesty struck a chord with the audience, many of whom could see a bit of themselves in his story. By the end of the event, the young man wasn't just another critic in the crowd. He became a symbol of the very resilience Obama had been talking about. And as the audience filed out of the venue, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a speech. It was a moment that would stay with them forever. Sometimes all it takes is a little perspective and a lot of courage to change everything. As the event ended and people began dispersing, the young man stood on the stage, still processing everything that had just happened. The applause had died down, but the words exchanged lingered in the air, almost echoing in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. Barack Obama, one of the most admired figures in the world, had taken the time to not just respond to him, but to listen. That realization hit him harder than anything else. But even as people came up to pat him on the back or offer words of encouragement, he felt a deep unease. Had he really been fair in his earlier criticism, or was it just a way to mask his own frustrations? Meanwhile, Obama stood at the edge of the stage, speaking with a small group of students who had stayed behind. His energy was calm and collected, but there was something about his demeanor that showed he hadn't brushed off what had happened. He glanced toward the young man, now standing alone and looking unsure of himself. Without hesitation, Obama walked back toward him, cutting through the thinning crowd. When their eyes met, the young man instinctively looked down, almost as if he was embarrassed. "Hey," Obama said softly, his voice carrying a kindness that felt disarming. "You all right? You seemed like you had more on your mind earlier." The young man hesitated, unsure if he should open up or just leave things as they were. But something about the former president's presence made him feel safe, like he wouldn't be judged for whatever he had to say. I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I was just frustrated. It feels like no matter how hard I try, I'm always stuck in the same place." And then hearing someone like you talk about hard work and resilience, it felt like it didn't apply to someone like me. Obama nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said, "and I don't blame you for feeling that way. Sometimes, when we're in the middle of our struggles, it's hard to see how things could ever get better. But let me tell you something. You're not alone in feeling like this, and you're not stuck forever, even if it feels that way right now." The young man looked up, his eyes searching Obama's face for some kind of reassurance. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and skepticism. "How do you know things will get better?" "Because I've been where you are," Obama replied simply. "Maybe not in the exact same way, but I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed, to doubt yourself, and to wonder if all the effort is worth it. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one moment, one opportunity, or even one conversation to change everything." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, the young man felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't the loud, triumphant kind of hope that came with big victories. It was quieter, more fragile, but it was there. Before he could respond, an older man approached them, his face lined with years of hard work and wisdom. He introduced himself as a retired teacher who had come to the event out of admiration for Obama's work. "I couldn't help but overhear," the man said, looking at the young man with a warm smile. "And I just want to say, I see a lot of potential in you. Don't let your doubts win. You've got more in you than you think." The young man blinked, caught off guard by the stranger's kind words. He muttered a quick "thank you," but the sincerity in his voice was evident. Obama placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. "You see," he said, "sometimes people around us see things we don't see in ourselves. Trust that." As the evening wore on, the young man found himself in conversations he never imagined having. Students sharing their own struggles, older attendees offering advice, and even Obama sharing lighter moments that made everyone laugh. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something bigger, like his voice mattered. It wasn't about whether he had all the answers or not. It was about realizing that he didn't have to go through it all alone. By the time the event officially wrapped up, the young man felt like a different person. He still had his doubts, his challenges, and his fears, but now, he also had something he hadn't had before, a sense of possibility. As Obama prepared to leave, he turned back to the young man one last time. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone casual but genuine. "Marcus," the young man replied, a small smile creeping onto his face. "Well, Marcus," Obama said, extending a hand for a firm handshake, "I hope you remember this moment the next time you feel stuck. And when you find your way forward, and you will, don't forget to pass it on. Help someone else the way people helped you tonight." Marcus nodded, the weight of those words settling deep into his heart. As he watched Obama walk away, surrounded by his team and well-wishers, he felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity. Maybe his path wouldn't be easy, and maybe he wouldn't have all the answers right away. But for the first time, he believed in the possibility of change, and in his own ability to make it happen. As Marcus stood there, watching Obama disappear into the night with his entourage, he felt an odd mix of emotions swirling inside him. For the first time in years, there was a spark of hope, but it was still fragile, almost like a flame flickering in the wind. He lingered near the now empty stage, his thoughts racing. What was he supposed to do with this newfound perspective? Could he really turn his life around, or would this just be another fleeting moment that faded away as reality crept back in? Before he could dwell on it too long, the retired teacher who had spoken to him earlier approached again. "Marcus," the older man said with a kind smile, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I can see that you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. I've been a teacher for over 30 years, and I've seen so many young people just like you, smart, passionate, but stuck. The good news is, stuck isn't permanent." Marcus looked at him, unsure of how to respond. "It feels permanent," he admitted quietly. "I mean, I work hard, but it's like I'm running in circles. Nothing ever really changes." The older man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's because sometimes working hard isn't enough on its own. You need direction, support, and, most importantly, belief in yourself. If you keep telling yourself you're stuck, guess what? You'll stay stuck. But if you start looking for small ways to move forward, little by little, things will change." Marcus let those words sink in. It wasn't like he hadn't heard similar advice before, but somehow, hearing it now, after everything that had happened that evening, felt different. "So, what do I do?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and frustration. "Where do I even start?" The man smiled again, this time with a touch of mischief. "Start by doing one thing that scares you," he said. "It doesn't have to be big. Just one small step outside of your comfort zone. That's how momentum begins." Marcus wasn't sure what that one thing would be, but he nodded anyway. It was easier to agree than to argue. The man handed him a small card with a handwritten number on it. "That's my number," he said. "If you ever want to talk, or if you need some guidance, give me a call. You don't have to do this alone, Marcus. None of us do." With that, the older man gave Marcus a reassuring pat on the back and walked away. Marcus stared at the card in his hand, feeling the weight of the gesture. He slipped it into his pocket, unsure if he'd ever use it, but grateful nonetheless. The next few days were a blur. Marcus returned to his routine, work, school, the endless grind, but something had shifted. He couldn't stop thinking about what Obama and the teacher had said. Their words replayed in his mind during his shifts at the coffee shop, during his late-night study sessions, even as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Slowly, an idea began to take shape. Maybe he didn't need to figure everything out all at once. Maybe he just needed to take one step no matter how small. One evening, after a particularly long day, Marcus sat down with a notebook and started writing. At first, it was just a list of things he wanted to change: his job, his grades, his mindset. But as he kept writing, the list turned into a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't detailed, but it was something, and for the first time, that felt like enough. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He decided to take the first small step by applying for a mentorship program at his college, a program he had always dismissed as not for people like me. He didn't expect much, but just hitting the submit button on the application felt like a victory. It was a tiny act of defiance against the doubt that had been holding him back. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things began to shift. Marcus didn't transform overnight, but he started noticing small wins. His professors began to notice his effort in class. His co-workers at the coffee shop saw a change in his attitude. Even his friends commented on how he seemed more optimistic, more focused. It wasn't always easy. There were still setbacks and moments of doubt, but Marcus kept going. Then, one day, he got an email that made his heart skip a beat. The mentorship program had accepted him. For a moment, he just stared at the screen, unsure if he could believe it. But as the realization sank in, a smile spread across his face, a real, genuine smile that he hadn't worn in years. He thought back to that night with Obama, to the words that had sparked this journey, and for the first time, he truly understood what they meant. Change didn't happen all at once. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It was about small steps, taken one at a time, with faith that they would eventually lead somewhere better. As Marcus walked into his first mentorship meeting, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was ready to face it head-on, one step at a time. As Marcus sat down in the mentorship meeting, he scanned the room, taking in the faces of other students who, like him, were searching for something, a way forward, a fresh start, or maybe just a sense of belonging. There was a quiet energy in the room, a mix of curiosity and nervous anticipation. The mentor, a woman named Dr. Caldwell, stood at the front of the room. Her calm but confident demeanor immediately set everyone at ease. She began by sharing her own story, one filled with struggles, failures, and triumphs. It was raw, real, and nothing like the polished success stories Marcus was used to hearing. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just listening to advice, but connecting with someone who truly understood. When it was Marcus's turn to introduce himself, his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. He shared a little about his background, his job at the coffee shop, and his struggles with feeling stuck. He didn't go into too much detail, but he didn't hold back either. As he spoke, he noticed a few people nodding, their faces filled with empathy. By the time he finished, he felt lighter, as if just saying the words out loud had lifted a weight off his chest. Dr. Caldwell smiled warmly at him. "Thank you for sharing that, Marcus," she said. "You're braver than you think, and just by being here, you've already taken a big step forward." Her words, though simple, hit him deeply. For so long, he had felt like his struggles were something to hide, a sign of failure. But now, he was starting to see them as part of his story, a story that was still being written. Over the next few weeks, the mentorship program became a cornerstone of Marcus's life. The weekly meetings were filled with honest conversations, practical advice, and moments of unexpected laughter. He found himself opening up more, sharing ideas and experiences with people who, just a month ago, would have felt like strangers. Slowly but surely, he started to see himself in a different light. He wasn't just someone struggling to get by. He was someone with potential, someone who could make a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of others. One evening, after a particularly engaging mentorship session, Marcus stayed back to talk to Dr. Caldwell. He had been thinking a lot about his future and wanted her advice. "Dr. Caldwell," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. I don't want to stay at the coffee shop forever. I mean, it's a job, and I'm grateful for it, but I feel like I want to do more. I just don't know where to start." She smiled, her eyes lighting up with encouragement. "That's a great realization, Marcus," she said. "The fact that you're thinking about what you want is the first step. Now, let's figure out the next one. What are you passionate about? What excites you or makes you lose track of time?" The question caught Marcus off guard. No one had ever asked him that before, not in a way that felt serious. He paused, thinking deeply. "I guess I've always loved helping people," he said slowly. "Like, when customers at the coffee shop are having a bad day, I try to cheer them up. It sounds small, but it makes me feel good, you know?" Dr. Caldwell nodded. "That's not small at all," she said. "Helping people is one of the most impactful things you can do. Have you ever thought about turning that into a career? Maybe counseling, social work, or even community organizing?" Marcus hadn't. Not really. But as she spoke, something clicked. The idea felt right, like a missing puzzle piece sliding into place. "I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that," he admitted. "I mean, I'm just a college student who barely has it together." Dr. Caldwell shook her head. "Don't sell yourself short," she said firmly. "No one starts out as an expert. The important thing is that you care, and you're willing to learn. The rest can be built over time." She handed him a flyer for a volunteer program at a local community center. "Why don't you start here?" she suggested. "It's a small commitment, but it'll give you a sense of whether this is something you want to pursue." Marcus took the flyer, his mind racing with possibilities. He thanked Dr. Caldwell and left the meeting feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The idea of stepping into something new was daunting, but it also felt like a chance to finally move forward. The next week, Marcus walked into the community center for his first day as a volunteer. He was greeted by a staff member who introduced him to the team and gave him a quick tour. The work was simple: organizing donations, helping with events, and assisting visitors, but it was meaningful. For the first time, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus started to see the impact of his efforts. He met people from all walks of life, each with their own stories and struggles, and in helping them, he found a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the difference he could make in the world around him. One evening, as Marcus was leaving the community center, he ran into Dr. Caldwell. She had come by to check on another volunteer and was pleasantly surprised to see him there. "Marcus," she said, her face lighting up. "How's it going? How do you feel?" He smiled, a genuine, confident smile that felt like it belonged to a new version of himself. "It's going great," he said. "I feel like I'm finally on the right path." And for the first time, he truly believed it. As Marcus walked home that evening, the crisp air felt different, lighter, almost refreshing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so content. Volunteering at the community center wasn't just about helping others. It was helping him, too. It gave him a sense of direction, a purpose he had been searching for but didn't know he needed. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was building something, not just for his future, but for the kind of person he wanted to become. The next day, Marcus was back at the coffee shop, serving his usual crowd of morning customers. The grind hadn't changed, but his attitude had. He noticed things he hadn't before, how a kind word or a genuine smile could brighten someone's day. One regular, an older woman who always ordered a simple black coffee, noticed the change in him. "You seem different these days," she said as she handed him her money. "Happier. What's your secret?" Marcus chuckled, a little surprised by her observation. "I guess I just started focusing on things that matter," he said. "Trying to do things that make a difference, you know?" She nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "That's a good way to live," she said softly. "Don't lose that." Her words stayed with him all day, a quiet reminder that the little things he did mattered. Later that evening, as he sat at his desk going through his classwork, Marcus found himself thinking about his journey so far. It hadn't been easy, and there was still plenty of challenges ahead. But for the first time, he wasn't intimidated by them. Instead, he felt ready to face whatever came his way, knowing he had the tools and the mindset to handle it. A week later, Marcus received an email from Dr. Caldwell. She had heard from the community center staff about how well he was doing and wanted to check in. The email wasn't long, but it was filled with encouragement and a simple question: "What's next for you?" That question lingered in Marcus's mind for days. What was next? He had taken the first steps, but where did he want those steps to lead? One evening, during a quiet moment at the community center, Marcus found himself talking to one of the directors. The director, a man named Mr. Hayes, had been running the center for over a decade and was full of wisdom. Marcus hesitated at first, but eventually opened up about his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what's next," he admitted. "I love volunteering here, but I want to do more. I just don't know what that looks like yet." Mr. Hayes smiled, leaning back in his chair. "That's the beauty of figuring it out," he said. "You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to keep showing up, keep learning, and keep growing. The rest will come." Those words, simple yet profound, stuck with Marcus. He didn't have to have it all figured out. It was okay to take things one step at a time, as long as he kept moving forward. Over the next few months, Marcus threw himself into his work at the community center, his studies, and even small improvements in his personal life. He started building connections, learning from the people around him, and finding ways to use his skills to make a bigger impact. Eventually, an opportunity came his way that he hadn't expected. The community center was launching a new program focused on mentoring at-risk youth, and they were looking for someone to help coordinate it. Mr. Hayes approached Marcus about the role, saying he thought Marcus would be a perfect fit. At first, Marcus was hesitant. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," he admitted. "What if I mess it up?" Mr. Hayes laughed, shaking his head. "Marcus, no one is ever 100% ready for anything. That's not how life works. But I've watched you grow over the past few months, and I know you've got what it takes. The only question is, do you believe that?" The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. Did he believe in himself? The truth was, he wasn't sure. But as he thought about everything he'd been through, the doubts, the struggles, the small victories, he realized that he didn't need to have complete confidence to take the leap. He just needed to trust himself enough to try. So, he said yes. Taking on the new role was challenging, but it was also one of the most rewarding experiences of Marcus's life. He worked closely with the youth, listening to their stories, guiding them through their own struggles, and helping them see their potential. In many ways, he saw himself in them, the doubts, the frustrations, the feeling of being stuck. And because he understood, he was able to connect with them in a way that felt real and meaningful. Months later, as Marcus stood in front of a group of young people during one of the mentoring sessions, he found himself telling his story. He talked about the night he stood up in that crowd, challenging Barack Obama, and how that one moment had set off a chain of events that changed his life. The room was silent as he spoke, every eye focused on him. When he finished, one of the teenagers raised their hand. "Do you think I could change my life too?" they asked, their voice filled with hesitation but also a hint of hope. Marcus smiled, his voice steady and full of conviction. "Absolutely," he said. "It starts with one step. It doesn't matter how small it is. What matters is that you take it." As he looked around the room, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come so far from where he started, and while the journey hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, that didn't scare him. He was ready to keep moving forward, one step at a time.